Our second scripture reading today comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verses 13 to 20. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. When I was in seminary, one of the definitions given to me when I was taking a preaching class, one of the definitions of preaching was that preaching is the gospel communicated through personality. And over the years of your being the Lighthouse, and even before that, your years of being the Elizabeth United Methodist Church and the Bethesda United Methodist Church, you have seen a lot of personalities up here talking with you and preaching. And it is my hope that any one of them that was preaching preached the same gospel, the same good news of Jesus Christ. But it always came to you through their personality. And we all of us, each and every one of us, have a different personality. One message coming across, but in many ways. I have a pastor friend that I met. He's actually a pastor in the Church of the Nazarene. And he wrote one of the essays in the book I helped to edit, called Uncontrolling Love. But that's how I met him. But he, as a church, is down in Kentucky and is in the Church of the Nazarene. And he always said that if he is unscripted, then he's going to ramble off for a long time, and you never know when he's going to come back again. Have you had a preacher like that? And he says for that reason, you know, he's aware of it, his church is aware of it, so for that reason he always preaches with a manuscript to make sure that he doesn't wander off too far and can come back again, you know, and stays on script, you might say. I tend to preach with notes. And at a period of time, I preached and I didn't have any notes. But my problem is, and I know you've seen this with me, is I can get stuck like a deer in the headlights. And you've probably seen when it's happened when I'm going, what is it that I was going to say next? I've been here 2 years. You've probably seen me do that. What is the, and I ask you for help. I'll say, what is the name of, or who's the person that, and you guys actually have helped me out in sermons, but that's always my fear. That's the reason I don't come up here very often just preaching to preach, because I am afraid of forgetting what in the world I was going to say next. And another issue I've had in my life, and sometimes it adds a lot of energy to a sermon, but when I get excited about something, I speak really loud. And that was brought to my attention this past week because we did this 24 hours of uncontrolling love thing for the book, and each of us had a 30-minute slide. It was the first time I had ever done Facebook Live. I don't know if you've ever done or seen, if you're on Facebook, seen somebody do something live. But so I'm sitting here in front of the only thing I would do Facebook Live on is my little phone, and I'm sitting there in front of the phone. And I'm talking about praying when you are worried, and praying when you can't be with the person that you're worried about. Like right now, we can't be with Jan, who's traveling, and we won't be with Mrs. Cox when she's traveling back to New Mexico. And so we worry, and we wish we could be with them, and we can't. And I was talking about prayer and how we reach out to God and we can commune with God, because God is omnipresent. God is everywhere. We commune with God, who's going to be with Mrs. Cox when she's traveling, who is with Jan right now, or whoever it might be. So I was talking about this, and I was saying this in Facebook Live, talking to whoever was out there in Facebook that was popping in. And anyway, my friend noticed, who had seen some of my sermons, and watched this, how much quieter my voice was when I was just talking to that Facebook versus when she sees me preaching. Sometimes I get really loud, and it's okay to get loud, but I don't want to yell at you. You know, I even get loud sometimes with my husband when I get really excited about something. He says, "Don't yell at me." So I don't want to yell at you. So I'm going to be conscious of my volume, because my friend said, you know, I'm wearing this microphone. She says, "Do you have somebody back there that's, controlling your volume?" And I said, "Yeah, Bruce is back there. He's controlling my volume." She says, "Let the microphone do the work." And I said, "Well, sometimes I have babies, I'm talking over, and I feel like I need to talk louder to be heard." And she says, No. The microphone can work." As I was telling about wonderful Sophia, about the other babies that we had today, Judah, and she said, "Don't even worry about it. Let the microphone do its work." So that's my personality, that when I get excited about something, I get loud.
We like you loud.
You like me loud?
I like you.
Well, if you want to turn up the volume, go like this. If you think I'm getting too loud, go like this, and I'll try to remember what those symbols mean.
Just get excited. Go for it.
Get excited, go for it. Okay. Well, I would try to do that, but I don't want to yell at it. Okay? So anyway, personalities up here talking with you. You've seen them all through your years of being in church. And but one of the most important things that was ever said to me, what I felt most honored about when I was in my preaching class, somebody said to me, "The person that we see up there when you're preaching is the same person we experience when we're interacting with you at any other time." And that was valuable to me. I love that somebody said that to me, because I value authenticity very much. And and it's important, and this is the key. That's important, because our witness to Jesus Christ can't be separated from who we are. You see? It cannot be separated from who we are. And even if you're not a professional preacher, you can preach. You can preach. It is true that each and every one of us can do that in a million ways. In a million ways that are each unique to each and every one of our personalities. You see, preaching is the gospel communicated through personality, and every one of us has one. And so think of ways that you have communicated the gospel to someone else in a unique way that only you could do, because there's no one else in the whole world like you. Or think of a way the gospel might have been communicated to you in a way that was unique only to the person that you know that communicated it to you. Preaching is the gospel communicated through personality. And all of it comes down to how each one of us personally answer the question that Jesus was asking the disciples. Who do you say that I am? This is the question that Jesus asked his disciples, and Peter answered. Peter answered. He said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And Jesus responded, it's not just flesh and blood that revealed this to you. God revealed this to you. And he said, upon this rock I will build my church, and the powers of hell will never prevail against it. Or Hades, or whatever you want to call it. Never prevail against it. And that there has been much debate among people regarding Peter's proclamation. Simon, son of Jonah, Jesus called him, and he called him Peter. And Peter, the word Peter, means rock. And that was Peter's name. And I know among the Roman Catholics, they use this verse to say that the popes are descended from Peter. That Peter is the rock on which the church is built, and they see Peter as this rock that the church is going to be built upon. Others say that it is the proclamation itself. It is the words that Peter said that is the rock. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I think it's both. That's my answer to a lot of things. Both and. I think it's both. Both the proclamation and Peter specifically. Because our proclamation, our testimony, our witness, our confession cannot be separated from our individual personality. So it wasn't just the gospel, it wasn't just the proclamation, it was the proclamation communicated through Peter. And both are important. This means that the rock in this scripture is Peter. But it's not only Peter. It's not only Peter. It could be any one of us. Instead of Simon Peter, we could say Sharon Peter, or we could say Harold Peter, or we could say Dolores Peter, or we could say Janie Peter. Or if that sounds sort of funny, I don't know if Anita wants her middle name to be Peter. Would you have wanted your mom to name you that? Anita Peter. Anita Peter movie. So, no, probably not. So maybe we can do it this way. Maybe we can say Jamie the Rock. Maybe we can say Anita the Rock. Maybe we can say Linda the Rock. Maybe we can say Fred the Rock. You see? I can say Donna the Rock. So let's try this all together. Say your name and then say the Rock. You got it? 1, 2, 3. Donna the Rock. Try it again. 1, 2, 3. Donna the Rock. Where each one of us rocks. And Jesus can say to each one of us, on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of hell will never prevail against it. To each and every one of us. Upon your testimony to Jesus Christ, in the only way that you can make it, you as an individual, you as the unique person you are, Christ will build his church on your testimony, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And we read about how Peter was the rock on which the church was built. We read about that in the Acts of the Apostles. In the Acts of the Apostles, Jesus, is the cornerstone of this building. If the church is like a building, Jesus is the cornerstone. And the apostles are the foundation stones. It even says in Revelation that when the new Jerusalem comes, the foundation stones on each one of them, 12 rocks, and each rock had a name of the disciples on it. And so the church is built with these rocks, and we see how Peter built the church, how Peter brought in these building stones for the church. In chapter 8, we see that those building stones were the Samaritans. The chapter 8 of Acts, the Samaritans were brought in to the church as building stones. And then we see in chapter 10 that the Gentiles were brought in. What building stones have you brought into the church over your lifetime? When you were the rock, when you were the testimony on which God built His church. And do you know other people? Maybe there was someone who brought you in as a building stone at one time. Maybe it was a testimony of someone else that brought you into the church. And it's not necessary that we completely understand God in order to make a proclamation, in order to make our testimony, in order to tell someone, Jesus is my Messiah. You see, we don't necessarily have to understand God perfectly, because Peter didn't. Peter didn't understand God perfectly. When he made the confession, you are the Messiah, he didn't know what Messiah was. And it won't be very few chapters or verses down the road, right after he makes that profession of faith, Jesus, you are the Messiah, that Jesus will say that the Messiah must suffer and the Messiah must die. And Peter will say, forbid it not, Lord. Forbid it not. Or forbid it, Lord. Not forbid it not, but he says, forbid it, Lord. He didn't think that was what a Messiah was supposed to be. So don't feel like you can't make your testimony if you don't completely understand everything about God. I don't understand everything. I probably never will. But we know Him. We know God. We have a relationship with God, and therefore we can proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ, even when we don't completely understand everything. I want to tell you a story of a lady who gave her testimony to her next door neighbor. Her name is Josie. You could call her Josie the Rock, okay? And she is, my friend Jeff I told you about earlier, she is his sister-in-law. She was his sister-in-law. She was a Christian for 12 years before she went to be with the Lord. And even before that, she was a good and moral person. And Jeff tells this story about her in an essay in the book I've told you about called Miracle Quotas. Because you see, Josie was the recipient of several miracles. She was the recipient of several miracles because through a course of time, she was the victim of several diseases. Started out with an aneurysm or two, and she recovered from it, and something else and something else. And cancer about 3 different times in different places, and every time there was a miracle and she came out of it. She was healed from it. And I'm going to tell you maybe a little bit more about Josie's story later at another time, because Anita has inspired me to do a healing service, and we'll pick ourselves out a date in the future that we can maybe invite some of the folks that we are praying for that are struggling with cancer, or really with anything, but there's a lot of people struggling with cancer, to come, and we will have a service that is specifically for healing. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Josie's miracles at that time. But Josie finally, her body couldn't cooperate with God anymore, and she passed. But before that, even before she got sick, she was trying to help her next door neighbor. Trying to help her next door neighbor who was an alcoholic of the kind that he drank so much that it was having an adverse effect on his body and would continue to have an adverse effect on his body. And each day she would approach him, her next door neighbor, in a gentle and a loving way, and she would share her witness. She would share her experience with Jesus Christ. She would make her testimony. She was being the rock to him. And he would never, she would never know the impact that she had on this man's life, because he did not give his heart to the Lord before she passed. And so she never knew, but she was always interacting with him in a loving way and always making her testimony to him. And not long after Josie passed, this gentleman, next door neighbor, gave her husband Mike a call and asked if he could come over to his house to visit. He wanted to go to her funeral, but he couldn't because he had become disabled, you see. And so Mike came over and visited at this man's house, and he expressed what an impact that Josie had on him. The impact that Josie had on him. And told the story that there is a church right across the road from where this man lived. And after Josie passed away, he walked across the road over to that church. It had a huge cross in the front yard. And he knelt down in front of that cross and he gave his life to the Lord. And I'm not saying that Josie had to die in order for this man to come to faith. But God still used her testimony, still used her proclamation, still used her example to him to connect with this man whom God loves so much. And so her life was still speaking even beyond her being here. So Josie was a person of whom Jesus could say, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it." Because this next door neighbor, she never knew it in her lifetime, but this next door neighbor was another rock, another building stone that was brought into the church on top of her as a building stone. And that's how God builds his church. That's how God builds his kingdom. So the question for today, the question for us is, can Jesus say to each one of us, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell cannot prevail against it"? When we say, "Jesus, you are the Messiah, you are the Son of the living God," what does that mean to each of us? How can we communicate that to those around us in the special way that only each and every one of us can, because of our unique personalities? How will those around us see this confession in our lives? Are we rocks that Christ can build his church upon? And if so, if we are indeed rocks, and Nita the rock, and Harold the rock, and Fred the rock, and Amanda the rock, and where is she? Sophia the rock. And there's one back there too, Zeke the rock. Whose testimony, and I've heard their testimony, whose testimony that God can build his church upon. And can each one of us do that? If each and every one of us is that rock, then the gates of hell will never prevail against this church. Amen? Amen. Amen. So let's say a prayer. Let's say a prayer that says, Dear Lord, please make us the rocks of your church. Please rename us Peter, that we may build your church. With the power of your Holy Spirit, with the love that you taught us to show one another, may we build your church with our testimony, because you are the Messiah, Lord, the Son of the living God. May we never cease to proclaim your name. Amen.